I stared down at the solid gold pen resting lightly between my fingers. It was hovering just inches above a massive stack of thick, cream-colored paper. The document sitting on my heavy oak desk was a contract worth exactly $250 million. The room around me was dead silent. It was the kind of heavy, expensive silence you only ever find in the penthouse suites of corporate high-rises, far above the noise of the city streets. Somewhere across town, my family was probably popping expensive bottles of champagne. They were celebrating the massive deal they truly believed was about to save their failing empire. They thought I was signing their salvation. They didn't know I was actively drafting their obituary. "You are a joke to this legacy," my brother had sneered at me years ago, his face twisted in absolute disgust. "Family or not, you do not belong here." Those poisonous words had burned a massive hole in my chest for nearly a decade. But today, the joke was finally on them. Because as their largest client, the faceless savior they had been begging for on their knees, I was about to cancel our contract, rip the floor completely out from under their feet, and watch the whole thing burn to ashes. How did it get to this point? How did a family destroy itself from the inside out? Let me take you back to where the nightmare truly started. 8 years ago, I walked into the Vanguard Logistics and Supply Chain headquarters. It was a massive $100 million glass and steel monstrosity that completely dominated the downtown skyline. My family owned it. My father, Alden, and my mother, Marin, had built it up from my grandfather's regional trucking company into a massive global powerhouse. I was incredibly proud of that building. I had just graduated at the absolute top of my class with a dual degree in systems engineering and business administration. I was young, I was hungry, and I was deeply ready to prove that I belonged in the family business. I walked into my father's massive corner office on the top floor, clutching my carefully prepared portfolio to my chest. My head was completely full of innovative ideas on how to optimize their severely outdated routing systems. I wanted to make them proud. I wanted to earn my last name. Instead of a welcome, I walked directly into an ambush. My older brother, Weston, was leaning casually against my father's mahogany desk, slowly swirling a glass of expensive scotch. He was wearing a custom Italian suit that probably cost more than my entire college tuition for one semester. My parents were sitting on the plush leather sofa across the room, looking at me like I was a complete stranger who had just wandered in off the street to ask for spare change. The air in the room was incredibly thick and hostile. I handed my thick portfolio to my father, my hands shaking slightly from the nerves. I told him I was fully ready to start working, ready to take on the junior analyst role we had talked about over the holidays. I smiled, waiting for the warm welcome. Weston actually laughed. It was a loud, incredibly ugly sound that echoed harshly off the glass walls of the office. He stepped forward, snatched the portfolio right out of my father's hands, barely glanced at the very first page, and tossed it casually into the trash can next to the desk. "You are a joke to this legacy," Declan, Weston sneered, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "Don't even try to walk through those doors. Family or not, you do not belong here. You don't have the killer instinct. You are soft. You are just a glorified nerd who reads books. This is the real world." I looked frantically over at my parents, waiting for them to say something, anything at all to defend me. I waited for my father to reprimand Weston for his incredible disrespect, for my mother to intervene and keep the peace like she always claimed to do. But my mother just looked away, meticulously brushing an invisible speck of dust off Weston's shoulder, refusing to even meet my eyes. My father let out a long, heavy, tired sigh, pinching the bridge of his nose like I was giving him a massive headache just by existing. "Listen to your brother, Declan," my father said, his voice cold, flat, and completely devoid of any paternal warmth. "You need to know your place in this world. Weston is officially stepping up as the vice president of operations today. We absolutely cannot have sibling rivalry undermining his authority in front of the board. It is significantly better for the family if you just step away right now. Find a nice, quiet, boring job somewhere else. Let your brother shine." I stood there, completely paralyzed. I was their blood. I had worked myself to the absolute bone to earn my degrees, sacrificing sleep, relationships, and my entire youth just to make them proud. And they were tossing me out like yesterday's garbage just to stroke Weston's incredibly fragile ego. Weston smirked at me, giving me that self-satisfied, deeply arrogant look that instantly made my blood boil in my veins. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I turned around and walked out of that office in complete silence. I walked away with nothing but the clothes on my back and a burning, permanent vow etched into my soul. The next time I walked through those incredibly expensive glass doors, I wouldn't be asking for a job. I would be bringing an empire to crush theirs. And I did. But let me tell you exactly how the nightmare started. If you looked closely at my childhood, you would find a vast, dark museum of pain. It was a carefully curated collection of slights, insults, and deep betrayals that shaped who I became. I was the textbook definition of the invisible child in a toxic household. Whenever anything went wrong in the house or the company, it was instantly Declan's fault. Whenever something went right, it was miraculously Weston's incredible triumph. Take my college graduation dinner for a perfect example. I was the valedictorian of my university. I had spent 4 grueling years living basically inside the campus library, surviving on stale dining hall coffee and cheap instant noodles, just to maintain a perfect 4.0 grade point average. My parents had told me we were going to a ridiculously expensive downtown steakhouse to celebrate my massive academic achievement. Or so I deeply thought. Halfway through the incredibly tense meal, my father clinked his silver fork against his crystal water glass and stood up. I smiled genuinely, adjusting my tie, getting ready to finally hear a proud toast about my hard work and dedication. Instead, my father reached into his tailored jacket, pulled a shiny set of keys out of his pocket, and tossed them across the white tablecloth directly to Weston. To Weston, my father announced, his voice booming with immense pride, for finally closing the regional shipping deal. A brand new Porsche, fully paid for by the company. You earned it, son. Weston grinned like a predator, holding up the keys like a massive golden trophy. I sat there, my stomach violently sinking into my shoes. I looked desperately at my mother. She was beaming at Weston, literal tears of joy shining in her eyes. I quietly, softly reminded them that it was actually my graduation night. My father waved a hand at me dismissively, barely looking in my direction. Degrees are fine, Declan, my father said, violently cutting into his incredibly rare steak. But Weston has the raw business instinct. That is exactly what pays the bills around here. Your little academic awards are cute, but they don't keep the lights on. Let your brother have his moment. That was exactly how it always was. But the absolute worst betrayal happened a year before they officially banned me from the company forever. I was still in college at the time, doing a completely unpaid summer internship at Vanguard Logistics. I was quietly reviewing some data when I noticed a massive, glaring flaw in their primary distribution routing system. Their trucks were deadheading for hundreds of miles, burning massive amounts of expensive fuel and wasting thousands of hours of driver time. I spent 3 grueling weeks writing a brand new, highly complex algorithm to fix it. I put together a detailed, 60-page report showing exactly how my fix would save the company over $2 million a year. I proudly left the heavy binder right on my father's desk on a late Friday afternoon. On Monday morning, I walked in to find a company-wide email announcing a massive cash bonus for Weston. He had apparently miraculously discovered a major inefficiency in the routing system over the weekend and implemented a genius fix. I stormed directly into his office, my heart pounding, demanding answers. Weston just laughed at me, casually tossing my own binder onto his desk. The title page had my name completely ripped off, violently replaced with his. I went sprinting to my mother, furious, hurt, and practically in tears. I told her Weston flat out stole my work. She sighed heavily, looking at me with that deeply disappointed expression she always reserved specifically for me. Your brother desperately needs this win, Declan, she said, calmly stirring her herbal tea. The board is doubting his leadership skills. He needs to show them he is highly capable. You are his younger brother. Is it really so hard to take a little loss so your own family can succeed? A little loss, That was exactly what my entire life was reduced to in their eyes. I was aggressively cropped out of family holiday photos because my mother claimed there wasn't enough room in the frame. I was left home alone during luxurious company retreats. I was the permanent scapegoat, the emotional punching bag, the designated loser. Have you ever been the invisible child? The one whose massive victories are completely ignored while the golden child gets a massive parade just for waking up in the morning? If you intimately know that specific kind of deep pain, drop a yes in the comments right now. It is a deeply lonely place to live, but trust me, it is also the perfect, quiet place to forge a deadly weapon. Immediately after I was viciously thrown out of Vanguard Logistics, I legally changed my last name. I completely dropped the family name and took my mother's maiden name. I didn't want any association whatsoever with the toxic legacy they were so fiercely protecting. I rented a tiny, incredibly run-down apartment on the bad side of town that permanently smelled like wet dog and cheap bleach. That was where I started my own company. I called it Apex Solutions. Those first 2 years were absolute, pure hell on earth. I worked 18 hours a day every single day. I survived on cheap rice and canned beans. I cold-called aggressive logistics clients until my voice physically gave out and my throat bled. I was a one-man show doing the complex coding, the aggressive marketing, the tedious accounting. I was barely keeping my head above the dark water. The only person in the entire world who didn't abandon me was my Uncle Silas. He was my father's younger brother, the quiet, observant one who always sat in the dark corner during chaotic family gatherings and watched everything with very sharp, knowing eyes. One rainy, miserable Tuesday night, Silas showed up at my crappy apartment. He didn't say much at all. He just looked around the miserable room, reached into his heavy coat, and handed me a folded cashier's check for $50,000. Prove them wrong, kid, Silas had said quietly, gently patting my shoulder before walking back out into the rain. That money was his own personal retirement savings. It was the crucial seed that ultimately grew into my massive empire. With that $50,000, I finally hired a small, highly dedicated team of brilliant, hungry developers who believed in my vision. We built a proprietary logistics software that was light years ahead of anything Vanguard was using. We didn't target the small, local mom-and-pop shops. We went straight for the massive jugular. We actively targeted the massive overseas shipping networks. Our first truly big break came when we aggressively outbid Vanguard for a massive international freight contract. We did it completely anonymously, heavily operating through complex shell corporations and legal proxies. Vanguard never even knew it was me who brutally beat them. They just thought some mysterious ghost company called Apex had swooped in out of nowhere and stolen their biggest, most lucrative client. From there, Apex Solutions absolutely exploded. Within 5 short years, we were quietly pulling in an annual revenue of over $300 million. I moved out of the slums and into a massive penthouse suite. I systematically hired the absolute best talent in the entire industry. But I stayed completely in the shadows. To the general public, the CEO of Apex was just a faceless, powerful board of directors. No one on earth knew that the titan devouring the logistics industry was the heavily discarded, hated son of the Vanguard Empire. I was honestly content to just leave my family in the rearview mirror forever. I really was. I was far too busy building my incredible life, making my own massive wealth, and living entirely on my own terms. I didn't care about their little, failing company anymore. Until exactly 6 months ago. My lead assistant walked into my massive office and handed me a thick, highly confidential file. It was an incredibly urgent, desperate plea for a massive infrastructure partnership. Vanguard Logistics was bleeding out terribly. They were actively drowning in massive debt, rapidly losing clients left and right, and they were literally begging Apex Solutions for a financial lifeline. They desperately wanted to sign a massive, exclusive contract that would completely save their sinking company. I stared intensely at the thick file on my desk, a slow, very dark smile spreading across my face. The lamb they had happily slaughtered years ago was now the one holding the sharp butcher's knife. And I knew exactly how I was going to use it. The deadly trap officially started with a highly manipulative phone call from Aunt Gemma. Gemma was my father's older sister, the ultimate family gossip, the classic flying monkey who always eagerly did my parents' dirty emotional work. She called me weeping loudly into the phone, claiming that my grandmother was severely ill and that the entire family needed to gather for an urgent dinner. She laid the toxic guilt on incredibly thick, telling me that holding grudges was destroying my soul and that I desperately needed to be the bigger person before it was too late. I knew deep in my gut it was a complete lie, but I agreed to go anyway. I deeply needed to see them. I needed to see the raw financial desperation hiding in their arrogant eyes. I deliberately showed up at my parents' sprawling, multi-million-dollar mansion in my old, heavily beat-up sedan. I strictly kept it specifically for rare occasions like this, so they wouldn't have any clue how incredibly well I was doing. I intentionally wore a plain, incredibly cheap off-the-rack suit that fit poorly. When I slowly walked into the massive dining room, the atmosphere was thick with forced, fake cheerfulness and cheap, unearned arrogance. Weston was holding court loudly at the head of the long table, naturally. My grandmother looked perfectly healthy, happily sipping her expensive wine and completely ignoring everyone around her. Oh, look who finally decided to grace us with his lowly presence. Weston drawled loudly, swirling his expensive glass of red wine. Still grinding away for pathetic pennies, little brother? I took a seat very quietly, calmly pouring myself some plain ice water. Just getting by, Weston. I hear Vanguard Logistics is doing some very interesting things lately. Interesting is a massive understatement. Weston boasted loudly, leaning back arrogantly in his plush chair. We are about to sign a true monster deal. $250 million in pure revenue. We are aggressively partnering with Apex Solutions. Have you ever even heard of them? Of course you haven't. It is way out of your pathetic league. My mother beamed with intense pride. Your brother is single-handedly saving the entire company. Declan. He brilliantly negotiated the whole thing himself. You really should take extensive notes. I smiled very tightly, hiding the burning rage. Really? That is incredibly impressive. I am basically operating on a completely different level than you, Weston said, proudly puffing out his chest. True CEO level. You wouldn't understand the massive pressure of real business. Later that evening, the air in the house grew suffocating. I stepped out onto the dark stone patio to get some fresh air. I unexpectedly found Cale out there. Cale was Weston's personal right-hand man, a sleazy, incredibly fast-talking executive assistant who always heavily smelled like cheap cologne and bad financial decisions. Cale was currently very, very drunk. Hey there, family outcast, Cale slurred heavily, leaning dangerously against the expensive stone railing. Rough night in the poor house? I completely ignored the childish insult. Weston seems pretty incredibly confident about this Apex deal. Cale let out a harsh, deeply bitter bark of laughter that echoed in the dark. Confident? Try totally desperate. He desperately needs this deal to go through, or we all literally go to federal prison. I instantly froze. The temperature around me seemed to drop. I slowly turned to look at Cale, fighting to keep my expression entirely neutral. What exactly do you mean by that? Cale waved his hand around very clumsily, spilling his drink. Your brother is a complete idiot. He's been heavily cooking the corporate books for 3 years straight, hiding massive operational losses, secretly skimming right off the top to aggressively fund his private real estate ventures. $40 million totally gone. Poof. Vanished. He truly thinks this massive Apex money is going to quickly patch the giant hole before the independent auditors ever notice. My heart pounded furiously against my ribs. I kept my voice incredibly steady, purely conversational. $40 million? That is a massive amount of money to hide from a board of directors. Cale heavily snorted. He is a total amateur. Left a massive paper trail a mile long connecting directly to the offshore accounts. But hey, as long as Apex signs the massive check on Friday, he buys himself another entire year of freedom. Cale stumbled away into the bushes, leaving me standing completely alone in the cold dark. I stood there, intensely looking out over my parents' perfectly manicured lawn. Weston wasn't just heavily losing money due to his sheer incompetence. He was actively, maliciously stealing it. He was ruthlessly robbing the family blind, actively destroying my grandfather's proud legacy, and my ignorant parents were loudly cheering him on while he happily did it. And they expected my hidden company to quietly foot the massive bill. That was the exact moment my remaining patience officially died. Whatever tiny, lingering sense of family loyalty I still had completely evaporated into the cold night air. The sleeping monster inside me finally woke up, and it was deeply hungry for blood. Early the very next morning, I walked briskly into my massive penthouse office at Apex Solutions and violently hit the intercom button. I immediately called in Vaughn. Vaughn was my lead independent auditor. He was a ruthless shark in a perfectly tailored suit, a cold man who viewed complex numbers with a cold, highly ruthless morality. He deeply didn't care about human feelings. He only cared about the brutal truth hidden in the ledger. I critically need you to go directly into Vanguard Logistics today, I clearly told Vaughn, tossing the thick, heavy file aggressively onto his pristine desk. We are officially doing a final, deep financial valuation before we ever sign the $250 million contract. I want you to violently tear their books apart. Look specifically for a $40 million discrepancy. Look deep into the offshore accounts. Find the blood. Vaughn slowly adjusted his silver glasses, his cold eyes gleaming with dark anticipation. Understood perfectly, sir. How deep exactly should I cut? All the way to the bone, I replied coldly. For the next 3 highly tense days, Vaughn heavily camped out directly in Vanguard's main accounting department. I received regular, highly panicked updates from my secret internal sources. Weston was heavily sweating. He desperately tried to forcefully block Vaughn's access, loudly claiming certain files were highly classified due to strict family privacy rules. Vaughn simply, coldly threatened to immediately pull the massive Apex deal entirely, and my deeply panicked father quickly ordered Weston to hand over absolutely everything. While Vaughn was quietly digging up the financial bodies, I was extremely busy drafting the final contract. I aggressively had my legal team insert a very specific, highly lethal clause buried deep in the complex terms and conditions. It was a classic, brutal poison pill. The clause strictly stated that if any financial fraud, massive embezzlement, or gross mismanagement was discovered prior to or during the execution of the contract, Apex Solutions had the absolute right to immediately terminate the entire agreement and instantly claim Vanguard's core assets, specifically including their corporate headquarters and their primary distribution hubs, as immediate collateral damage for severe breach of faith. It was a highly standard, if incredibly aggressive, corporate safeguard. Any highly competent corporate lawyer would have immediately flagged it. Any competent CEO would have aggressively negotiated it out of the deal. But Weston wasn't remotely competent. He was highly arrogant, incredibly lazy, and totally desperate. Late on Thursday afternoon, a stressed courier urgently delivered the finalized draft to Vanguard for their preliminary signatures. I sat silently in my dark office, intensely watching the tracking notification update on my computer screen. An hour later, I got a frantic text from my hidden contact inside the building. Weston had actually signed the draft. He hadn't even bothered to send it to the legal department. He was so incredibly frantic to instantly get his hands on the money that he just quickly flipped to the very last page and sloppily scribbled his arrogant name. I leaned back heavily in my expensive leather chair, staring blankly at the ceiling. They had literally handed me the golden keys to their own total destruction, beautifully wrapped in a bow. Have you ever watched someone happily dig their own grave while loudly bragging about how incredibly nice the shovel is? That was exactly Weston. He truly thought he was brilliantly outsmarting everyone. He thought he was the undisputed king of the world. But he had just legally sold his entire kingdom directly to the very brother he had viciously thrown away. Everything was perfectly, beautifully in place. The massive trap was fully sprung, the steel jaws were tightly locked. All that was left was the brutal execution. Before we get to the massive boardroom explosion, hit that like button right now if you are highly ready for some serious, brutal karma. You are definitely not going to want to miss what exactly happened when the ghost they viciously tried to bury finally walked back through their front door. The morning of the final board meeting felt entirely different from any other morning of my entire life. The air in the city felt crisp, clear, and perfectly aligned with my massive ambitions. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my penthouse, meticulously adjusting the cuffs of my dark navy, tailored suit. It was not flashy. It did not scream for attention like the expensive garbage Weston always wore to cover up his insecurities. It was the quiet, understated armor of a man who held all the true power in the room. I looked at my reflection and did not see the broken, rejected kid from 8 years ago. I saw a man ready to tear down an empire. Across town, the executive boardroom at Vanguard Logistics was practically buzzing with unearned excitement. My internal sources had already given me the full, pathetic picture of what was happening inside. The massive mahogany table was polished to a mirror shine. Expensive catered pastries and imported sparkling water were laid out perfectly, waiting to impress a guest who they thought would save them. Weston was sitting right at the head of the table, wearing a brand new custom suit, looking like the king of a castle made entirely of sand. My mother and father were sitting proudly beside him. My father was glowing, ready to finally secure the $250 million contract that would erase their failures. The entire board of directors was present, checking their expensive watches, eagerly waiting for the mysterious representative from Apex Solutions to arrive. They were expecting a faceless corporate drone. They were not expecting me. I pulled up to the Vanguard building in my private Aston Martin, ignoring the valet and parking directly in the spot reserved for the chief executive officer. The same security guard who used to look at me with pity years ago now stared with wide eyes as I confidently strode through the massive glass doors. I did not stop at the front desk. I walked straight to the private executive elevator, swiped the master access card my inside contact had provided, and hit the button for the top floor. The ride up was silent, giving me a moment to savor the heavy anticipation building in my chest. At exactly 10 o'clock in the morning, I reached the top floor. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway and stopped in front of the heavy double doors of the executive boardroom. I did not knock. I simply grabbed the handles and pushed them open. The low murmur of arrogant conversation instantly died in the room. Every single head turned toward the entrance, expecting to see their financial savior holding a briefcase full of money. I walked into the room with slow, deliberate steps. My posture was relaxed, my expression cold and unreadable. I did not rush. I let the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out, letting the sheer shock wash over every person at that massive table. For 3 agonizing seconds, no one even breathed. The board members looked confused, glancing back and forth between me and my father. They vaguely recognized me from old company events, but I was supposed to be the banished loser, erased from the family history. Weston was the very first one to break the silence. His smug, arrogant smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated fury. His face turned violently red, the veins in his neck bulging against his tight silk collar. "What the hell are you doing in here?" Weston aggressively barked, slamming his hands down on the polished mahogany table and jumping to his feet. "Security. Who the hell let him up here? This is a confidential, closed board meeting, you pathetic piece of trash. Get out of my building before I have you physically thrown out onto the street." My mother gasped loudly, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She looked exactly as if she had just seen a terrifying ghost. My father's face went pale, all the proud color draining rapidly from his cheeks. "Declan," my father hissed through clenched teeth, his voice trembling with furious anger. "I told you to never step foot in this building again. You are violently disrupting a critical negotiation. Leave right now, or I swear to God I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I calmly walked right up to the heavy leather chair directly opposite of Weston, pulled it out and slowly, deliberately sat down. I smoothed the lapels of my suit, folding my hands neatly in front of me on the polished wood. "You are entirely right about one thing, Weston," I said, my voice incredibly smooth, cutting through the chaotic shouting like a razor blade. "This is indeed a confidential, closed-door meeting between Vanguard Logistics and Apex Solutions." I paused, letting the heavy weight of my words slowly sink into their thick skulls. I looked directly into Weston's panicked eyes, enjoying the sudden flicker of deep confusion and raw fear replacing his earlier arrogance. And I am sitting exactly where I belong, I continued, my voice echoing loudly in the silent room. I am here officially acting as the sole representative of Apex Solutions, because I am the founder, the chairman, and the chief executive officer of the company. Hello, family. It has been a very long time. The silence that followed that statement was heavy enough to crush human bone. It was the perfect sound of an entire empire violently crashing into a brick wall. Weston stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to form a single coherent word. My mother dropped her crystal water glass. It shattered loudly against the hardwood floor, but no one even looked down. My father fell backward into his chair, looking exactly as if he had just been forcefully punched in the stomach. The Trojan horse had successfully breached the gates, and the massacre was finally about to begin. That cannot possibly be true, Weston stammered, his voice suddenly sounding incredibly small and pathetic. He looked frantically around the massive room, desperately hoping someone would tell him this was all just a terrible, elaborate joke. Apex is a global titan. You are just a massive failure. You live in a dump. You drive a piece of garbage car. We did a full background check on the corporate structure. You did a background check on a series of heavily encrypted shell companies and proxy boards. I corrected him calmly, leaning back in my expensive leather chair. I suggest you hire much better corporate investigators next time, Weston. And as for my car, that was just an entertaining prop specifically for family dinners. I actually drove my private Aston Martin here this morning. It is parked directly in your reserved spot in the VIP garage. I did not give them another single second to recover from the shock. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick, detailed financial audit report Vaughn had meticulously prepared. I casually tossed it directly across the long table. It slid perfectly over the polished wood, coming to a dead stop right in front of my father's shaking hands. Let us skip the pleasantries and get straight to the real business, I said, my voice turning incredibly cold and businesslike. I sent my independent audit team into your accounting department earlier this week. What they quickly found was not just standard incompetence. It was aggressive, illegal financial destruction. My father stared down at the thick folder like it was an active bomb. What is this, Declan? He asked, his voice shaking terribly. That is your ruin, I answered smoothly. I pulled out a small remote and clicked it. The massive presentation screen directly behind Weston instantly buzzed to life. It did not show the rosy, fake projections Weston had prepared. It showed detailed, redacted bank statements, secret offshore account numbers, and massive, glaring red lines of stolen corporate funds. Over the past 3 grueling years, your beloved golden child has aggressively siphoned exactly $40 million out of Vanguard Logistics. I explained loudly, making sure every single board member heard my words crystal clear. He hid the massive operational losses under fake vendor invoices and funneled the stolen cash directly into his own private real estate holding company in the Cayman Islands. The entire boardroom instantly erupted into uncontrolled chaos. The independent directors started shouting, demanding immediate explanations. Lawyers scrambled for their ringing phones. Weston turned pale, sweat pouring heavily down his forehead. That is a lie. Weston screamed at the top of his lungs, pointing a violently shaking finger directly at me. He is making this up. He has always been deeply jealous of me. He is faking the documents to ruin my perfect reputation. My father desperately stood up, raising his hands to try and frantically calm the furious room. Declan, please, my father pleaded, using my name with actual desperation for the very first time in my entire life. We are still family. This is a private family matter. Let us take this offline. Close the doors. We can easily fix whatever small mistakes Weston might have accidentally made. Do not do this in front of the entire board. I looked at my father, feeling zero pity. A small mistake? I repeated, my voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. $40 million is not a small mistake, Alden. It is a massive federal crime. And we are not family. You publicly fired me from this family 8 years ago, remember? You told me I did not have the killer instinct. Well, you are about to finally see exactly how sharp my teeth really are. One of the senior board members, an aggressive man named Peterson, stood up, slamming his fist on the table. This is outrageous, Peterson yelled. True or not, you cannot just casually barge in here and hijack a critical board meeting. Security is actively on the way. We are having you physically thrown out of this building immediately. I could not help it. I genuinely smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile that made Peterson physically step back. Throw me out of the building? I asked, casually examining my fingernails. That would actually be problematic for you, Peterson. You see, Vanguard Logistics leveraged this entire corporate headquarters 3 years ago just to stay afloat. You sold it to a massive private property management firm called Horizon Properties, and you have been leasing it back ever since. I reached into my briefcase one more time and pulled out a single, legally notarized document, dropping it right on the table. I bought Horizon Properties in an all-cash deal exactly 14 months ago, I stated clearly, watching the horror slowly dawn on their faces. You do not own this massive building anymore. I do. I am your actual landlord. And according to my records, Vanguard Logistics is currently exactly 6 months behind on the rent. So no, Peterson, you are not throwing me out of my own building. If anyone is getting thrown out onto the street today, it is every single one of you. The sheer, suffocating level of panic in that boardroom was intoxicating to watch. They were cornered, surrounded on all sides by the massive, invisible walls I had patiently built around them for years. They had nowhere left to run. Before the chaotic shouting could start up again, the boardroom doors opened quietly, and Vaughn stepped inside. My lead auditor looked incredibly sharp, unaffected by the massive emotional explosion happening in the room. He walked calmly over to my side, casually placing a small, official-looking folder right in front of me. Everything is fully processed, Mr. CEO, Vaughn said clearly, his voice projecting easily over the massive panic. The initial financial reports have been officially filed. Filed where? Weston choked out, his eyes darting frantically between me and Vaughn. Where did you file them? Vaughn adjusted his glasses, looking at Weston like he was a repulsive insect. I have officially submitted the preliminary findings of massive corporate fraud and active embezzlement directly to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Vaughn stated clinically. The federal regulators have fully acknowledged receipt. Your accounts have likely already been frozen. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sob, physically collapsing directly onto the table, burying her face in her trembling hands. Oh my God, Weston, she cried out. You are going to federal prison. They are going to lock my baby away. I stood up slowly, commanding the absolute attention of every single person in the room. My voice was deadly quiet, but it carried perfectly. The $250 million contract between Apex Solutions and Vanguard Logistics is officially canceled. I declared smoothly, effective immediately. I am invoking the poison pill clause you so arrogantly signed yesterday, Weston. Because of your massive, undeniable financial fraud, Apex is entirely pulling our funding. The finality of the statement hit them like a massive freight train. Without that money, Vanguard Logistics was technically insolvent. They were bankrupt. The legacy they had proudly guarded, the legacy they had violently kicked me out to fiercely protect, was dead. My father, desperate and broken, tried to play his final, pathetic card. He stood up, his face red with unhinged anger. You cannot just do this, Declan, he roared, spit flying from his mouth. I am still the chairman of this board. Our family collectively controls exactly 60% of the voting shares. I will use my majority block to freeze this company. I will violently tie you up in complex legal battles for the next decade. You will never get your hands on our core assets. He looked around the table, desperately demanding loyalty from the terrified board. But then, the quietest man in the room slowly stood up. Uncle Silas casually pushed his chair back and buttoned his worn tweed jacket. He looked at my father with deep, profound pity. Actually, Alden, that is not entirely accurate anymore, Silas said, his voice gentle but incredibly firm. You only personally control 45% of the voting shares. I have always held the other 15%. My father looked at him, confused. What does that matter, Silas? We vote together. We are family. We protect the legacy. Silas shook his head slowly. Not anymore, Alden. I warned you years ago that treating your own son like garbage would eventually destroy this family. You did not listen. So, early this morning, before this meeting even started, I officially legally sold my entire 15% voting block. Silas turned his head and looked directly at me, a proud, very quiet smile on his face. I sold it to Declan. The final, brutal checkmate. The realization violently slammed into my father's chest. He did the quick math in his head. His 45% was useless now. I had the 15% from Silas, heavily combined with the massive chunks of independent shares I had aggressively bought up through dummy corporations over the past year. I controlled the majority. I owned their debts. I owned the building they were sitting in. And I owned their fate. They had no cards left to play. No money, no power, no building. The only thing they had left in the entire world was the one single person they had spent their entire lives trying to destroy. Thank you to everyone who has been watching and deeply listening to this crazy journey. If you are still here, I want you to drop the letter W in the comments down below. That W strictly stands for win. Drop that W right now, and I promise I will personally heart and respond to every single person who types it. You guys are the best. Now, let us fully finish this. The massive collapse was deeply fascinating to witness in real time. It did not happen in slow motion. It happened all at once, crushing them under the sheer weight of their own terrifying reality. Weston finally broke. He slumped back into his expensive leather chair, hyperventilating. His massive arrogance, his endless superiority, was entirely gone. He put his head between his knees, crying like a severely punished child. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Cale, his sleazy little assistant, quietly creeping toward the boardroom doors, desperately trying to sneak out before the federal authorities officially arrived. I did not even bother stopping him. Cale was a pathetic rat fleeing a sinking ship. He was not worth my valuable time. My father, the proud, arrogant, untouchable Alden, physically deflated. He slumped back down, resting his heavy forehead on his shaking hands. The massive fight had left his body. He looked 20 years older in a matter of seconds. Declan, please, my father whispered, his voice broken and pathetic. What do you actually want? Do you want me to publicly beg? I will beg. Just please do not destroy the family name. Do not send your brother to federal prison. I looked down at the pathetic mess in front of me. I felt incredibly cold. I felt absolutely nothing. I do not want your pathetic apologies, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any human emotion. And I certainly do not care about your toxic family name. I am here purely to clean up the massive, disgusting mess you proudly created. I snapped my fingers, and Vaughn immediately slid a complex legal document directly across the table. These are my final, non-negotiable terms, I stated clearly. Number 1. Weston is officially, immediately terminated from this company for massive gross misconduct and federal fraud. He is stripped of all equity and shares. Apex Solutions will not press corporate charges, but whatever the federal SEC investigators decide to do with him is entirely his own massive problem. Weston let out a loud, agonizing groan, heavily gripping his hair. Number 2. I continued smoothly, ignoring the pathetic sounds coming from my brother. Alden and Marin, you are both resigning from the Vanguard Board of Directors, effective exactly at this very moment. You will quietly hand over all of your remaining voting shares to me. You will permanently retire, move far away to your summer house, and you will never, ever step foot inside a corporate boardroom again. My mother looked up, her face ruined by heavy tears. You are aggressively stealing our entire company, she accused weakly. I am saving it from bankruptcy, I corrected her coldly. Because term number 3 is this. I am entirely absorbing Vanguard Logistics heavily into Apex Solutions. The Vanguard name is officially dead. This massive company will be ruthlessly restructured from the ground up, entirely under my control. I checked my heavy gold watch. You have exactly 2 minutes to fully sign those papers. If you do not sign, I walk out that door. Vanguard violently files for massive bankruptcy by tomorrow morning, and I personally guarantee that every single federal investigator in this country will aggressively turn your entire lives inside out. They heavily resisted for exactly 1 minute and 45 seconds. They aggressively cried. They deeply pleaded. They pathetically tried to bring up fake childhood memories to manipulate my emotions. I simply stood there, staring at them like they were insignificant insects. Finally, with shaking, pathetic hands, my father reached for the heavy gold pen. He violently signed his name, essentially signing away his entire life's work. My mother signed next, sobbing the entire time. Last was Weston. He could not even look me in the eye as he signed his total ruin. As soon as the ink was dry, Vaughn calmly collected the heavy documents, slipping them safely into his locked briefcase. "It is officially done," I said quietly. I buttoned my suit jacket. "You have exactly 1 hour to pack your offices. Security will aggressively escort you entirely off my property." I did not wait for their pathetic reactions. I turned around and confidently walked out of the silent boardroom. I did not look back. The massive shift in extreme power was total, absolute, and deeply permanent. A few incredibly fast weeks later, the massive dust had finally settled. The aggressive corporate takeover made massive headlines across every major financial news outlet in the country. The media called it a brilliant, ruthless masterstroke by the mysterious CEO of Apex Solutions. They heavily praised my extreme efficiency and total lack of messy corporate sentiment. The deep reality for my former family was incredibly bleak. Weston was currently facing multiple federal charges for massive wire fraud and grand embezzlement. His highly expensive lawyers were desperately trying to negotiate a harsh plea deal, but he was highly likely going to spend the next 5 to 8 years sitting quietly in a small federal prison cell. My parents had aggressively retreated in deep shame to their isolated summer home in the mountains. They had desperately tried to call me and heavily text me dozens of times. They desperately tried to aggressively play the innocent victims, loudly crying about how deeply cruel and incredibly heartless I was for tearing their precious family apart. I did not answer a single one of their calls. I entirely blocked their phone numbers. I completely blocked their emails. They were fully dead to me. I was currently standing quietly in my brand new massive office. It was my father's old corner office on the top floor of the building, but I had ordered it gutted and totally redesigned. All the heavy, dark mahogany and oppressive old money decorations were thrown in the trash. The room was now incredibly bright, modern, and perfectly suited exactly to my own tastes. I stood calmly looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the incredibly busy city move far below me. I felt a very deep, profound sense of peace. People often say that the best revenge is living well. That is only partially true. The absolutely best revenge is living incredibly well and becoming so incredibly massive, so undeniably successful, that the extremely toxic people who heavily tried to aggressively destroy you are forcefully forced to live in your massive shadow forever. I did not brutally destroy my family out of blind anger. I simply aggressively held up a highly accurate mirror, and they destroyed themselves with their own deep greed, massive incompetence, and highly pathetic arrogance. So, Reddit and everyone watching this entire journey, my incredibly toxic family aggressively says I am a heartless monster for not giving them a second chance, for viciously putting massive business over pure blood. But I confidently say they fully lost the absolute right to ever call me family a very long time ago. Am I exactly the deep villain in this specific story? Or did they just finally violently meet the massive, brutal karma they patiently built for themselves over a decade? Tell me exactly what you would have aggressively done in the comments below. I really want to hear your honest opinions. If this deeply emotional story truly resonated with you in any way, if you have ever had to aggressively build your own incredible table from scratch because highly toxic people violently refuse to ever give you a seat, I heavily encourage you to hit that subscribe button right now. Like this video to help the channel grow, and share it with someone out there who deeply needs a massive reminder of their own true, undeniable worth. Never let anyone tell you that you do not deeply belong. Until next time, stay incredibly strong, know your total value, and loudly keep heavily building your massive empire in complete silence.